You're listening to Data Science Leaders, the premier podcast for executives tackling the world's most important challenges using the power of machine learning. Let's dive in.
Daniel, I want to welcome you to the podcast. We're excited about today's chat. Obviously, you have a very extensive background, biography, etc. I don't want to do it any disservice, so maybe you could spend about 30 seconds describing who you are and how your career has progressed.
Well, great to be with you here in Philly. I grew up down the coast in Silver Spring, Maryland, and actually got my start in science as a high school student at the NIH. I did a summer internship and then went into the lab for my high school science fair project. To make a long story short, my high school science fair project was looking at inhibiting IgE-mediated histamine release, and I came up with a way to do that with an antibody. Won the county science fair, won the international science fair, and that approach eventually became Xolair, which is a big drug for Genentech. But at the time, I did not know anything about patenting or biotech, and I only found out about it a few years later. I got a call from Genentech wanting my original publications as part of a patent dispute. But that got me interested in sort of science and scaling impact. Went to Brown University. While I was there, I was an EMT, driving ambulances, so I got involved in the clinical side. Did my medical school at Stanford, did some extra research as a Howard Hughes Fellow in immunology, got involved in stem cells and T cells. So I always loved the sort of interface of science and medicine. Couldn't decide what to do for residency, but ended up doing med-peds, combined medicine and pediatrics at MGH, Mass General and Boston Children's. Then back to Stanford for Hotel California for hematology, oncology, and bone marrow transplant. And then in the lab with Irv Weissman, back looking at stem cells and immunology. But in that mix, I've always crossed fields. Love space and aviation. I joined the Air National Guard as a flight surgeon when I was at Mass General, so I could at least fly in the backseat of fighter jets. I built an early digital health online medical bookstore as the internet was coming online. And, you know, my same difficulty in choosing a medical specialty kind of led me to sort of like to look at different realms. And so while I was doing the traditional physician scientist platform with NIH grants and doing UCSF clinical work in bone marrow transplant, I got involved in something called Singularity University, which thematically is looking at the future through these exponentials, and built a program now called Next Med Health that looks at what is the future of health and medicine at this convergence of AI and big data and wearables and 3D printing and nanotech and genomics, and bringing people together to invent that future in a more collaborative, impactful way.
Very interesting, a very eclectic and diverse background, which I think contributes to some of your insights on how you approach things. You talked a little bit about thinking about the future of health. What does the future of health look like, and what recent shifts make you more optimistic about it?
Well, hopefully the future of health isn't what we have today is the future of sick care. We're kind of traditionally waiting for disease to happen. We spend 80% of our spend in the U.S. at least on the last few months of life, and on the folks with the 20% of the population with chronic disease, much of which is somewhat preventable. And so I'm hopeful that the future of healthcare is truly more health focused. It needs to break open our old ways of doing things. The current way is based on intermittent data collected in the four walls of the clinic, you know, when you get your annual labs and vital signs. And so we tend to be reactive. We wait for the patient to show up in the ER with a heart attack, or stroke, or late stage cancer. Even President Biden, unfortunately, just diagnosed with, you know, advanced cancer. You know, are there going to be ways to sense that continuously, or do home-based testing, or use new forms of digital biomarkers from your voice or from your selfie on your phone to pick up diseases at stage 0? So I think part of this future is using this new multimodal area. It's not going to just be your genome, which certainly can play a role in your risk for cancers and other diseases, but looking at your exposome, your sociome, your metabolomics, and again, creating massive amounts of data that no one can keep track of, but to synthesize that using AI, machine learning, big data, to each have our own sort of personal digital twin or avatar that lives on our mobile devices or in the cloud that can give us guidance proactively, almost for free.
That's interesting. I think I hear a couple of lenses there is, hey, there's obviously technology evolution. There's potentially regulations. What do you think is the biggest challenge? Is it people? Is it the government and regulations catching up to technology? Is it the technology not being pervasive enough? What do you think is holding us back?
Well, technology often moves exponentially. Moore's law, the power of computing, is the classic example. But regulatory and reimbursement and social is somewhat linear. And so, you know, there's been some good examples. For the FDA, to their credit, created this whole software as a medical device, speeding up ways that we can blend sort of the digital therapeutics and some, you know, connected devices and drugs in new ways. But still, you need to have our leadership, both Congress and others who set the rules that the FDA implements, for example, to be a bit more exponential. Understand, you know, how can AI, machine learning, CRISPR, new forms of drug development, new forms of virtualized clinical trials get us to safe, personalized, and effective drugs and other interventions faster. That's one barrier. And sometimes, we don't want to be moving fast and breaking things, particularly in biomedicine. But then we'll also have the challenges of implementation science. So I have a platform called digital.health with several thousand solutions out there in the digital health space. Some are diagnostic, some are therapeutic, but most clinicians don't know about them. Very few doctors or pharmacists have ever prescribed a wearable device like a connected blood pressure cuff to the patient and use that data to manage something as common as hypertension. So that means you need to understand the workflows, sometimes stuck in our electronic medical records. It needs to understand the payment models, who pays for that remote patient monitoring element or that app that goes with the drug. It means the pharma companies often need to think, how do you not just get the drug in the bottle, but how do you get the patient to take it and then modify it and personalize the data and the insights? So it's a systems design and behavior change challenge, sometimes more than the technology itself. And that comes to mindset and also breaking open the silos and thinking more collaboratively, because the future of medicine isn't being built in any one old-fashioned specialty or any one technology bucket. It's sort of this super convergence of AI and sensors and big data and nanotech and the human touch and design thinking so that the technology doesn't sit on the shelf but gets utilized at the point of care.
No, yeah, I think it's interesting you talk about the clinicians and not knowing necessarily what's available from a technology perspective. You also hear, obviously, a lot of LLMs, AI models who are sort of being pitted against physicians about medical diagnostic imaging, things like that. What are you hearing from folks who are day-to-day working in that field who are trying to figure out, hey, how do I partner with technology to deliver the best outcomes for my patients?
Yeah, I think the word partner and collaborate is really the key word. I mean, there's already a shortage of doctors, nurses, subspecialists in most of the country and the world. So it's not about AI replacing your doctor, nurse, or pharmacist, but those working with AI collaboratively to upskill themselves, be able to work at the top of their license and essentially democratize care and bring better outcomes at lower cost, where they're not stuck in the scut work or spending time charting. We call it pajama time, and that's means folks go home from their long clinical day and have to spend time writing their notes. One, very current example now rolling out across many EMRs is scribing, and the AI can listen to the conversation like we're having and write the summary note just like Zoom can. But get sort of some of that element, which is really still tied to billing and regulatory elements. The future is going to be hopefully where these systems, again, depending on regulation and the medical legal establishment, can be co-pilots to care. They can say, you're talking to Chris, he's complaining of abdominal pain, and it's reminding me, maybe it's not appendicitis. Have you thought about diverticulosis? Maybe there's another thing you want to do as part of your workup. Or when I'm going to prescribe a new biologic, it's not going to be based on what drug rep talked to me at the conference last week. It might be suggesting, based on that patient's genomics and other multimodal data, this is truly the most evidence-based one in real time. We're at the beginning eras, really. It's only 2.5 years since GPT launched. We need to start designing our medical systems, our medical education, our workflows to start planning for the LLMs of 2030 and not architecting them based on our old modalities. So tons of possibilities, and there's ethical and regulatory challenges. Will it be malpractice that I didn't use the AI to do your abdominal workup in the future? Will the pharma company that's not using big data, AI, machine learning to not just do the discovery, but run through effective clinical trials, be disrupted by two kids in a garage with their data and virtualized trials that can often find, design, and maybe roll out a drug in a new format?
You talked a little bit about EHR systems, coding data, things like that, transcribing, things like that. One of the things that we see and we're hearing from our customers is the appetite from a clinical trial perspective for patient recruitment. We know that's a big, big challenge for clinical trials, to actually tap into some of that unstructured data, the traditional notes, things like that, being able to use AI for that. So I guess when we start thinking about data, obviously life sciences pharma generates a ton of structured coded data, a ton of unstructured data. How do we start taking advantage of that huge mountain of data?
Yeah, I think the power of these new models is that it's not just your basic labs and maybe omics and your traditional endpoints of tumor size or how many steps can you take, but now can look at the sort of synthesis of almost like a FICO score for health, someone's ability to walk around the house, be socially interactive. Those might be new endpoints, or these secondary endpoints that are important to measure. I think we're also going to end up, hopefully, given the challenges of recruitment, as we get into this age of the engaged, empowered patient, the idea of self-care. Many folks are going and getting their own labs done or getting their own screenings with imaging and cancer screenings, is that they're increasingly going to have their healthcare enabled by their own health agents, which can be sifting through their data and go, Daniel, I know you've got condition X. There's a new trial that just popped up that you might be relevant for. Or the clinician, the clinic, while working with their AI-enabled agent, will suggest in real time that, Mrs. Smith, by the way, it looks like you might be a perfect candidate for this new biologic. Would you like to try it? And then it streamlines that whole process. So I think the combination of new forms of data and insights, the idea of digital diagnostics, what your Fitbit or your Apple Watch or your Internet of Things home can tell about an individual as part of their trial, could increasingly get built into our clinical design motifs and really improve the speed to getting a new modality to impact, and also hyper-personalizing it when it's going to be most effective.
No, exactly. We talked a little bit about the change management around clinicians and physicians getting more comfortable with the data, being able to partner, et cetera. How do we take that same approach with the general population? Obviously, people tend to be very protective of their data. They're concerned about passwords, companies stealing their data, commercializing, et cetera. How do we overcome that stigma to get them to realize some of the benefits of this data sharing?
Well, I think some of us realize that, privacy is sort of dead. I mean, at least the younger generation, they're sharing everything all the time, and they're less worried. I think HIPAA is, for example, a well-meaning law, but built before the digital age. And I've seen patients almost die because the system was more on top of keeping their privacy intact than sharing the data to make a real-time life-saving decision. I think when individuals realize that when they become data donors, that they can really not just help the system or big pharma or their health player, but help themselves. The example I always use is Google Maps and Waze. Most of us can't imagine. We might remember driving with paper maps, some of us, but now we get around based on crowdsourced data. Based on the street that you're on. You don't care about the traffic in San Francisco when you're in Philadelphia, but if we had that sort of Google Maps equivalent where we're all hopefully smartly, anonymously sharing relevant data, it doesn't need to be all of it, but we can opt in, that can build a better health journey map for someone, a patient like you or the patient like mine. And we're going to realize that by sharing in the right format, we can build much faster insights that are going to be hyper relevant to me or the patient in front of me or for the drug I'm developing. And so I think it's about education and also building smarter, sometimes encoded, blockchain-enabled ways, for example, to share the data anonymously, or new companies that are building encryption homomorphic platforms to never take the data out of the clinic or the hospital or from the patient, but get the analysis done in opt-in ways.
Because we obviously, some patients you said are more progressive around, they want to contribute to society, things like that. How do we also push that to other stakeholders? Like pharma companies traditionally are very protective of data. They're running very expensive, very long duration trials. They want to hold that information, those insights very close to the vest. How do we encourage more sharing across the industry? Because the more data that we have, the better insights and the better decisions we'll be able to make.
I think like anything else, it's about incentives. We don't practice evidence-based medicine. We practice reimbursement and incentive-based medicine, and sometimes those incentives are misaligned. And so sometimes it might require rules from the top. Boy, 10 plus years ago, I went to the first Biden cancer moonshot element. And one of the big discussions was, how do we get the big players, health systems, payers, pharma companies to better share their data, including the failed data, right, when things didn't work? And is there some way to reward that cross-collaboration, maybe cross-licensing or some IP elements? I'm not sure what the answer would be. Let's ask ChatGPT. But I think there's probably some ways to design the data flows. I know that NIH-funded trials require your data. It becomes available at least at a certain point in time. And with new forms of making sense of that in this multimodal age, I think we're seeing good examples. Right down the street from where we're talking is UPenn. My friend David Fagenbaum is a former patient, now medical professor, who almost died of Castleman's disease. He figured out using a immunosuppressive drug, tacrolimus, that it cured his Castleman's disease. He's now built a whole platform on repurposing existing drugs from the data and the literature and beyond to maybe solve and cure for many rare diseases. That's maybe an example. It's still a nonprofit, it's academic, but where big pharma and other stakeholders could collaborate and share.
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously a long time ago, Transcelerate was formed with the goal of, hey, let's bring all these companies together, figure out where there's non-competitive or pre-competitive opportunities for collaboration. So I'll be interested to see if that starts nudging it, if it's the government nudging it, et cetera. I think I spend a lot of my time in the R&D space of life sciences. So obviously some of the things that are happening with discovery, bioinformatics are very interesting to me. Are there any things in that area that have surprised you or you think are newsworthy that you're like, that's kind of cool?
Well, I think, we're speaking in May of 2025, and just last week there are two Nature publications on, here in Pennsylvania, a baby with a rare metabolic disorder where they designed a very individualized CRISPR-based base editing therapy that seems to maybe have done a long-term cure in this now 10-month-old who's looking like he's more normal. That's a magical example of N-of-1 based AI accelerated drug discovery and application. So that's moving a little faster than we think. Sometimes we're entering this, Gattaca world. If the listener hasn't seen the movie Gattaca, which is a 25-year-old movie, it's showing somewhat of the potential dystopian future where there are genetic haves and have-nots. But the art of the possible is getting so incredible. It's moving so quickly. It's faster than regulatory and reimbursement and clinicians can keep up with. But I guess what surprised me is how we've gone from CRISPR winning the Nobel Prize after only being discovered as a tool 14 years ago to long-term cures, and what's going to be possible for multi-genomic diseases. Might the future be one where we start to knock out our cancer genes or hypercholesterolemia genes proactively, and that creates whole new options for biopharma to be moving upstream or moving to this era of health span. How do we prevent disease rather than just treat it once it's at stage 3 or stage 4? I'm also sometimes surprised that sometimes there are little things that are a little slower. There's this realm of digital therapeutics where sometimes the app per se can, sometimes with the drug and sometimes without, can do a better job than the pure API alone. It's been hard for clinicians to get those in their workflows and learn how to use these digital modalities. And whether it's a pharmacist or using new remote patient monitoring codes or the hospital home movement, how do we sort of bring those things together? It may take a new generation and new forms of medical education to really accelerate these to the art of the possible.
Yeah, you talked a little bit about personalized medicine. Obviously, that's something that's very exciting, going from, hey, instead of manufacturing 1 million doses of one type of medicine to manufacturing 1 dose of 1 million types of medicine. It's a lot of work, a lot of scale that has to be reimagined from a manufacturing and a life sciences perspective. But do you think that's where we're going? Do you think we're going to go to a place where people aren't always listening to ads on TV being like, you know what, I think I have that, to a place where they're getting things that are more prescribed specifically for them because we have a deeper understanding of their world and their body?
Yeah, well, we're at the age now where roughly $100 genome, it'll on its way to a $10 genome. Almost every one of us and our kids, even in utero, will be sequenced. So I'm trained in medicine and pediatrics. As a pediatrician, I'll hopefully have a patient. I'll have their multi-omic data set and can likely predict their downstream risks for everything from dementia to cardiovascular disease to anxiety, and be more proactive with their lifestyle, which is number one and key for almost all impacts. But back to N of 1, in many cases, we might start to very proactively treat someone with a personalized vaccine against early dementia or BRCA1 or other common forms of cancer. I think the blockbuster drugs probably still won't go away, but we'll hopefully better prescribe them so that something as common as a statin, like atorvastatin, the dose could be 5 milligrams, it could be 40 based on your pharmacogenomics. And many folks fall off because they should have been on simvastatin, which doesn't give them the same elements. So that kind of example of picking the right drug, the right dose, the right combination, maybe even the idea of 3D printing your personalized polypill that could be used for longevity or for managing and preventing disease, could be that sort of blend of not just a new drug, but how you dose them and combine them in the right way to be proactive and hyper-personalized.
Talked a little bit about sitting in on Joe Biden's moonshot a handful of years ago. Obviously, we've had multiple attempts at moonshots, things like that. Which is one that gets you jazzed?
Well, the problem with moonshot is like there's a moon, right? And it's there. But cancer is a constellation. I mean, almost every cancer has its own molecular genomic fingerprint. And so that's where we're going to hopefully build this future of, digital twins for every tumor and virtualized tumor boards that can truly hyper-personalize the cocktail of traditional drugs, immunotherapies, et cetera. I think what gets me excited in the oncology space is the ability now to, at low cost, truly sequence and understand the disease at its genetic level. It's the ability to screen for them in new ways. I mean, in the last few years, we've seen the rollout of things like Grail and Guardant and other blood biopsies. And then you combine that, and it's still debated, with relatively low-cost full-body imaging. You can imagine the physical exam of the future is once a year or two, you get a 10-minute full-body MRI, and you also have a low-cost blood test, of which there are different modalities. Some look at epigenetics, some look at other elements, and go, we can really pick things up early when there's something you can do about it. You don't want to know that you have Lou Gehrig's disease if there's nothing you can do about it. But if you could find you have stage 0 to 1 cancer and treat it at that stage when it's truly actionable, that's going to be important. How do you scale that? How do you pay for it? Are bigger questions, but that's where a lot of the art of the possible is. And back to the art of the possible, the physical exam of today, your stethoscope, they still lay some hands on your belly, listen to your heart and lungs, ask you a few questions, maybe look at your labs. The future is going to be this continuous form of data from your smartwatch, from your Apple Watch, from your Internet of Medical Things, from your digital fingerprints on how you interact with your phone that can, again, find that problem early based on subtle changes. It might be that your Zoom camera picks up changes in your vital signs or yellowing of your eyeball or microstroke. All those combined multiple modality elements will hopefully pick up cancers and other modalities early, from neurologic disease to metabolic, and give us a new lens to treat them earlier. And for the pharma space, that opens up a whole new market of proactive early preventative therapies. And then as the market globalizes, the global south, et cetera, there's a whole new markets there that can access healthcare through their smartphone and their digital doctors that will hopefully democratize health, medicine, and biopharma.
That actually prompted two questions. The first question I have is, you talk obviously a lot about earlier detection, understanding, hey, what's actually happening in someone's body. Do you think the biggest gains from a medical outcomes perspective are earlier diagnosis, or do you think the creation and synthesis of new drugs is going to have the bigger impact?
Probably a bit of both. I mean, we're understanding diseases at their molecular level and new targets for them. And now with Nobel Prize generated modalities, that will help us go from these sometimes one-size-fits-all drugs with a lot of side effects to much more targeted ones, and often sometimes combinations of those. So that just because you can pick up a disease early doesn't mean treating it is the right answer. But in some cases, Parkinson's, for example, or Alzheimer's, that can be picked up from now blood-based elements, or looking in the back of your eyeball, or gaming tests, or virtual reality headsets where you challenge someone's cognition, can really make a difference because you start to treat it stage 0 to stage 1. Whereas today, the traditional model is you only get approval for that Alzheimer's drug at stage 3, when it might slow things down a bit and improve progression, but really not making a dent in the actual disease experience. So I think it's a combination. Like all these things, it's a super convergence.
I guess the other thing is, topically, you're talking about sequencing, screening, things like that. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask, what's your take on Regeneron buying 23andMe?
Is that the new news?
It happened yesterday.
Wow. Well, a very long story short, when I finished my residency at Mass General, 2020, I read a whole business plan called My Genetics, because that was when the first genomes were being sequenced, still $10,000, $20,000, but saw this future of consumer genomics coming when we'd be able to look at that. And a few years later, I met Ann Wojcicki and Linda, who were starting 23andMe, and I even gave them that business plan. I said, what you need is not just the consumer side, but the overlap with the clinical and the biomedical side. And to their credit, they built a pretty amazing platform. It's changed a lot of lives, done a lot of good. Business model challenging, SNPs probably not the way to go. But I think it's opened up people's appetite and ability to look at their genomics, not just finding their lost cousins, but knowing some of their risks and hopefully being proactive and smart. And now, unfortunately, they didn't have a great business outcome so far, but Regeneron, which has the amazing ability to potentially leverage personalized genomic information, keep it safe, and leverage new forms of drugs and combinations and insights, might be a real magical, impactful, long-term win.
No, yeah, I'm very excited to see what they're able to do with it, because I think they've proven that they could do some innovative things. I'm excited for it. Speaking of innovative things, are there any technologies or startups that you're really excited about?
Well, I'm trained in hem-onc and bone marrow transplant, so I'm still excited about stem cell therapies and this emerging realm of, from xenotransplants all the way to 3D printing hearts and organs. I'm going to see Dean Kamen and the folks at the Army Advanced Regenerative Manufacturing Institute later this week. The ability to scale cell and gene therapies is getting interesting, whether it's a Keytruda type element or CAR-Ts and others that requires scaling, often individualized, biopharma as a cellular therapy. That's getting exciting. Another space that's super unmet need is neuroscience, right? The brain is sort of the final frontier, and many call it depression. There's many subtypes with maybe different molecular approaches. But one approach I saw recently, we had featured at my Next Med Health conference, was a one-day cure for depression. You've heard of folks doing ketamine and other elements, even psychedelics that might have some temporary roles. But this company's developed a portable version of transmagnetic stimulation, TMS. They're combining it with a neuroadaptogen, kind of like an MDMA correlate. In a one-day, multiple session therapy with TMS, they're getting 6-month plus long-term remission of recalcitrant depression. That might be a game changer. Or for other neurologic diseases, using focused ultrasound for curing Parkinson's, or focused ultrasound even in implantable brain-computer interfaces. That's exciting. Or next generation brain-computer interfaces for not just helping someone who's quadriplegic, but enabling folks who are locked in to go from thought to speech using computers. So that's all this exciting superconvergence with some big areas like mental health that have a long way to go and are comorbidities for many other medical conditions.
No, those all seem very, very exciting. I guess the flip side of that, is there anything that you're sick and tired of hearing? Anything that you think is overhyped?
I think there's a bit of overhype about the longevity movement. I mean, I'm all for health span and reducing sick span, but you now have a lot of folks in the snake oil realm promising drink this butter, take this supplement for your mitochondrial health, which may have some basic science behind them, but are very far from being proven out. Or go get the stem cell therapy in Costa Rica when it could be dangerous and there's no mechanism that makes sense. So there's the true promise of what some amazing biopharma companies are doing, from Altos Labs and others trying to do in-body epigenetic reprogramming. But there's also sort of the, I don't want to call it snake oil, but unproven in some cases that are getting pushed out too early. So I'm not sick of it, but I want to make sure that we're blending the right energy to be focused on health span and not just be the Silicon Valley billionaire types that are sort of over emphasized on trying to quote unquote live forever, because forever is a long time. And I think is an opportunity for the whole life sciences and biopharma realm to think about, moving upstream to improving health span. Even you could argue the GLP-1 movement is going to be improving that for significant swaths of the population. So not something I'm sort of sick of, but a little bit, a little bit of some perspective on not overhyping these things.
No, that makes sense. I guess last question. I appreciate your time, Daniel. If your perspective is, what's the one thing that you would challenge the audience? So knowing that we're talking to a lot of data scientists, a lot of AI aficionados, what is the one thing you would challenge them to do better to help contribute to better outcomes for their patients?
Well, so data's the new oil. There's all these new exponential ways to get your digitome and your sociome and your metabolome and your microbiome and your proteome and pick your ohm, right? Massive amounts of data. Some of it's super exciting and it's getting cheaper and cheaper and easier to collect. But by itself, it's a so what, right? Even your genome by itself certainly isn't enough. And so the ability to pull those together and make sense of them is important. But also in terms of reaching the patient and the human and the clinician, you need to sort of synthesize that. My Aura ring or my Apple Watch or my Whoop all give me different versions of my sleep score, but at least gives me something that I don't need to look at my REM and my deep and try and become a sleep scientist, but something that is actionable, right? Something, I'm overusing the sleep score, but at least can guide me to getting a better night's sleep and optimizing certain metrics and pick up what's going to be most impactful for me for my sleep hygiene. And that's going to affect my cognitive health and my metabolic health downstream. So sometimes synthesizing using smart design thinking, not just overwhelming people with data. No one wants the data. They want the actionable insights that they can use themselves at the bedside or the website or on their own mobile app without any clinician or health system or pharma company in the loop. So it's kind of partnering with the data to insights and knowledge to actionability. And the field, I think, is exciting of implementation science, which kind of pulls that all together to make that data useful for prevention, diagnostics, therapy, global health, public health, all has really exciting potential. So to all of you who are in the data science space and helping create and make sense of it, think about all that super convergence and how to make the data most applicable just in time in the right format and flavor so that it can use our magical LLM GPTs to communicate in the 8th grade language, or you're talking to a biostatistician in a new forum to really move the needle for impacting health and medicine around the planet.
No, I think that's all great advice. I know we talked earlier about your varied and extensive experience, a lot of different opportunities you've had. What are you working on now? What excites you? How can people connect with you, et cetera?
Thanks. Well, you can find me at danielcraftmd.net, which has a whole set of some of my past and current endeavors. Well, my passion's always often been around, or I became sort of, I don't call myself a futurist, I'm more of a nowist, but connecting the dots, and have been building out this program called NextMed Health, nextmed.health, where you can learn from a whole cross-convergence of exponential thinkers from all sorts of different fields. And we've got lots of videos there that cross everything from mental health and foodist medicine to future of nanotech and robotics. So check that out. And then I see now this acceleration of wearables, uterables, digital data, and I've been building out a platform called digital.health. That's literally the domain, digital.health, and where you can go and discover what's already out there. It might be a wearable to help you with your sleep, or a digital platform for doing drug discovery or doing clinical trials or mental health. And what's exciting to me is that there's already a lot of these dots out there. It's about connecting them and pulling them in and enabling you as an individual or as a health and life sciences person to leverage them today and put them as part of our sort of digital formulary for anybody in the healthcare system, whether you're an empowered consumer or patient or a clinician or a pharma company or a data scientist who wants to make the future happen faster. So those are two endeavors. And then the third is what I've been developing on this idea of the future of pharma, the challenge being precision and adherence. And I've been building a little platform called IntelliMedicine for 3D printing personalized body pills, where the future might be you have the Daniel pill, the Chris pill with your dose of aspirin, statin, beta blocker, synthroid, vitamin D. It might print on your kitchen counter every day based on your needs and your blood pressure. Or eventually it could be on patent drugs or your sort of cocktail for health span and longevity to make the ability to hyper-personalized dosing and medications much more friendly and safe and effective. So those are a few.
Excellent. I like it. No, I appreciate your commitment, obviously, to health, to the industry, but also to bringing people together, to convening this expertise. I think that's probably the most impressive, exciting part for me. And
one part of that is, how do we bring not just the current generation along, but the next generation? What's the future of, let's say, medical school? I mean, a medical student starting today in 2025 won't finish their, let's say, internal medicine residency until 2033. How much has changed in the world in the last 3 years? How do you select the right person for medical school? Is it based on their ability to do physics and organic chemistry, or more their EQ? Should they be learning data science and AI and coding as part of their medical education and virtualized care? You know, how are we going to build our workforce of the future that collaborates with technology? And that applies to biopharma as well. It's a really interesting time where the future is coming faster than we think, and we need to prepare for that by being a little, skating a little bit forward than we often think. And that means bringing the regulators and the reimbursers and culture and education along together to build the future of health and medicine for everybody, because it's the art of the possible is getting so exciting, but we know we have mindsets and barriers to move to get us there.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I appreciate you nudging us in the right direction. Obviously, there is a lot of change still to occur, but I think a lot of us are very excited about what the future has. So again, Daniel, I appreciate your time, and it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to Data Science Leaders from Domino Data Lab. If you found our discussion insightful, be sure to subscribe to never miss an episode. Your support helps us deliver cutting-edge content and keep the data science community informed and inspired. We appreciate every review. Until next time.